I just want to give a quick perspective on a worldview. And these are just a few little tidbits that I feel like define who I am as an artist, a designer, a researcher, a technologist. They may seem a little disparate, but to me, these are the things that really are kind of in my head all the time in the background when I'm thinking about the world. And this first one is this graph. Um, and this graph shows the world population, and that circle there is 1965, where I was born. And at a certain point in my life, I just became really, really aware of how I was kind of at this beginning of this really steep trajectory of population growth in humans. And I just became very interested in thinking about how the world changed on a global scale and on a local scale for me as the world became more crowded with humans, and how the systems of human life and animal life, non-human life, changed with this new density of human life. And then conversely, with that density of human life, the things that started to happen with non-human life, the diminished habitat for non-human life, and then of course starting in the 70s, species extinction. And I do feel like this balance of the reshaping of the way that we used our globe, or we're using our globe, is really key to my perspective. Another key to my perspective is this image. And when I was getting this image, I sort of accidentally took off the state borders, and I thought, oh, that's so interesting just to be able to look at this map without those borders that we're so used to looking at. And these little yellow dots are different places that I've lived in the United States. And for a long time, those places felt really, really different and really, really far apart. And now that I've kind of zoomed out, I feel like that the Great Lakes is this connective tissue that really grounds my perspective of the different places that I've lived, and really is an important marker for the perspective I have on land and water and forest and seasons and all the different things that I think about when I'm making my work or doing my research. So, oh, and then the family context. These are two pictures of me and my dad on the left, and my mother and my brother on the right. In the introduction, it said that I'm a longtime environmentalist. Really, from the time I was born, I was very aware of my surroundings, my environment. We went outside every day. We were taught very early to be aware of the weather, of the changing of the seasons, and to do deep kinds of observation of our surroundings. So Dad and I are at Niagara Falls, and I just love how it's just so clear to me that we're thinking deeply or observing deeply in that picture. And on the picture on the right, it's more of a smiley portrait, but there's definitely a sense that there's this sort of connection to nature that we all had as a family growing up. So when I first started making artwork, this is my MFA show from 2005. I literally started like just making tangles of wires. And this is the image that I live with in my head all the time, of just like interconnections and strings and neurons and all kinds of webs and systems that are interconnected. So I wanted you to know that going into this talk, because I'm going to talk a lot about complexity. And so I put in a couple of other images, not by me, but I definitely, in making this talk, decided I need to make more images that just express that neural brain-like web of complexity that sort of lives in my head all the time. So this is one, and this is another. This is from a really interesting piece that went up this summer in New York by Tomos Sorenso, who did these multiple series of works, and one of them was these sculptures made out of spider webs, different species of spiders, making these different sculptures. So these are the kinds of images that I have in my head all the time. And then I just, to end this section, want to posit this one question, and I'm not going to answer it in this talk, and it's a very deep philosophical question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And it's just something that's now part of my everyday quest, and that is, what is nature? What is it? Where is it? What are its boundaries? Are we nature? Are we separate from it? Are we part of it? How do we become more part of it? So I'm excited to share with you all the unknowing and uncertainty that I've become to embrace in this research trajectory. So I'm just going to show you two projects. Superorganism is the project I made for my capstone experience at the University of Michigan. So that was a one-year program, and it was a digital and material technologies program. And in the process of learning about computational design and digital fabrication, I got really interested in working with mycelium. Mycelium is the root structure of mushrooms. And at the time, which was summer of 21, it was just starting to get used as a biomaterial. And these are some of the early experiments I did, very close up, of the mushroom roots, the thin threads that mycelium make, also expression, of visual expression of this sort of web of life. And I think probably most of you know by now, it's kind of become popular, but mycelium is thought to be kind of a superorganism in that it just grows and grows and grows and can live thousands of years, and it connects other organisms under the ground by sending signals, sending nutrients, sending moisture from different plants, especially trees, one to another. So I started asking myself, even though the most popular thing to do with mycelium is to make something and then desiccate it and kill the mycelium and have the structure, I just got really interested in it as a living structure. So how can I co-create with a living material? And then I got really interested in what is the balance of authorship in that co-creation? How much should I control? How much should it control? And I got really interested in all these little structures. So I tried to keep it alive as long as possible. And I got really interested in all these little miniature structures that it would make, which are attempts to make a mushroom. But this material was already kind of engineered to try to not make a mushroom. So it would make all these little attempts to make little fruiting bodies. And I ended up with this shape, which I got through computational design. I'm not going to go into that in this talk, but I wanted to plant it and have it have a natural life cycle. And originally I was going to put plants in it, but then I decided to put it out in a natural environment and just let it have its own life cycle. So I was able to put it in a friend's little nature preserve that's attached to their backyard, and let it sit. It's for a year. This was what happened to it in the fall. It started to fill with water and debris. And this is what happened to it in the winter, it's filled with snow. And then this is somewhere in the spring, I think, as it started to biodegrade. And I put a trail camera on it, the kind of cameras that people use to like track deer, and got lots of wildlife. I don't think my friend Sally knew that she had so much wildlife in her backyard. So I have like lots and lots of footage to put together for a time-lapse video. And I got some, I couldn't do the micro organisms with a time-lapse camera, but I did have some experiences finding little bitty creatures on my piece too. And then I also was able to find some micro organisms as well. So I expect that this is algae mixed in with the mycelium, maybe some mold, but I didn't have any resources to kind of test it, figure out what it is. But I used this work to apply to this insect workshop in the UK this summer and was accepted. And I was largely working by myself. I did not have a lot of information about people, other people working with mycelium or working in this way of trying to keep the mycelium alive and working with other species. And I found a group of like-minded people with this insect workshop. So this is in Newcastle University, and it's called the OME, OME, which is like home, but without the H. And it's part of the Hub for Biotechnology in the Built Environment. So it is part of the university that brings together biotechnicians and architects to try and figure out what can happen in that borderland between the built environment and the grown environment. And you can see here on the outside walls, there's these holes that can take these bolts, and you can put panels up on the wall and test different biomaterials. So in the course of 9 days, we made this prototype, and I'll go into detail about this prototype, but I just wanted you to see it to begin with. It was an incredibly interesting experience. It was an incredibly interesting multimedia experience, but it was also really interesting in terms of a co-collaboration experience. And I'm showing you these pictures of the last day of working because I think it demonstrates what kind of relationship we were able to make in that short 9 days. By the time we were in assembly mode, it was just all hands in. And this is one of my favorite pictures because we were just doing, and we just knew each other well enough, even in that short time, to just be all hands and really intertwined as a group. So I just have a few other pictures of the prototype itself, and I'm sure you have lots of questions about that, but I have a quick little slide for that as well. So here we are with the graph. So we worked with mycelium and clay, both fired and unfired. We did some foraging for other materials that were useful for insect occupation. We did some sensing so that we could try to anticipate microclimate scenarios for insects. And then we did these sort of improvised textiles that we also filled with mycelium and clay, which is one of the specialties of one of the organizers. And then we added those on. And here was the environmental sensing setup. So we had mycelium, unfired clay, fired clay, textile, cotton and wool, and then also forage biomaterial. So I have a lot of slides here. I'm going to run through them pretty quickly, but we had a process for clay preparation, 3D printing of the clay. So this was the computational design where we were trying to use factors such as porosity and airflow and moisture to make the designs, make a series of designs. Then we would fire some of them. Then we would inoculate them with the mycelium, let them grow in these bags, and then assemble them. Here's just a grouping of all the different tiles that we made. And the darker ones are the unfired, the lighter ones are the fired. And here is just a kind of a spreadsheet of all the different, actually I think I have it backwards here. So first we started design discussions, we did some tangible designing, we did some crocheting and sensing, then we did the modeling. This is kind of the 3D modeling that I learned about in school. This is, then we did just a fabricating marathon, and I have to go back. We had mycelium growth, so we had you have to let mycelium grow for about 3 days. We figured out a structure for mounting it onto the wall, and then we assembled, and we even found time for a public workshop. So for 14 people in 9 days, I think we did pretty well. Okay. And here's just a few close-ups of the mycelium interacting with the different materials, the fiber, the unfired clay, the fired, and then the fired clay. And then post-camp monitoring hasn't been as close as we would like. The primary researcher who's doing her PhD on this in particular was not living in the UK. So one of the things that we learned from this is that we really, anything that is made like this, and this was highly speculative, really needs to be babysat, not just taking pictures, but taking the data and being able to kind of adjust the experiments for the conditions as it goes along. Unfortunately, our sensors did fail. That was too hot. And so we have plans to do another iteration in a different location, a couple of different locations, and to redo some of the sensing. So this was really kind of a speculative project, but we did have success getting a bug. And this is just an example of sort of the workflow. Somebody took a picture, I found a little buggy, we enlarged it, and one of the other members was able to identify it. So we're doing a lot of work remotely as well. And then quickly, I just wanted to mention this relational map. We did a lot of work on Miro, and any of you who are designers or architects probably know about Miro. But maybe some of the other ones, other of you may not. Miro is a online sort of whiteboard tool, and you can use it to do mapping, all kinds of flow charts, but you can also throw pictures in there. You can mark websites, you can add videos. So it's a really nice repository for like all media. And we used it heavily to document our process. And I thought that that was one of the really strong things that I took away from the camp. I've used Miro before, but some of the organizers were really good at doing kind of relational mapping. And we would meet every morning and every night and kind of go through the process again to try to tease out where we were and where we wanted to go, so that we were constantly revisiting the process. And I think for complex problems, interdisciplinary work, and multi-species worldings. This is a really important piece of the process. I wrote here in my notes that it was emotionally and mentally taxing to do this work because it took resources away from like getting the project done. But I think it reinforced the strengths of the team. It assigned us to tasks with extraordinary compassion and thoughtfulness, and it focused the remaining short time of 2 or 3 days towards bringing all the aspects forward with equal attention and quality. So it was a very strong organizing factor. So Insect Camp Part 2, obviously I don't have as much documentation because I didn't go, but I kept very close watch on it. And like I said, I've been working with the members who did go a lot since then. So that took place in Denmark. And this picture on the left is Svenja's tiny house that she lives in, so that she can live with the work that she's making. And she primarily makes textiles that she infuses with mycelium or seeds in order to attract insects and birds. So she, at a certain point a couple of years ago, decided that she needed to live with her experiments and moved, had a tiny house designed and moved to the countryside so that she could make work in situ. And out of these, and so she invited people to her property, and about 35 people lived for a week and did a bunch of embodiment experiments. So everyone put in their knowledges, which ranged from different things like, how to make honey, or how to, identify ticks, how to make kombucha kinds of things, to other kinds of embodiment practices, like the image on the left is somebody trying to taste the smell that ants have. So they tried a bunch of different things, really kind of creative embodiment practices to get closer to animals. And I'm just going to read a little bit from a paper here. This portion of summer camp was designed to address the need to broaden human perception so that we become more sensitive to and aware of the presence of insects and other small organisms that are difficult to comprehend. To investigate these questions, we organized Insect Summer Camp Part 2. Here, a group of 35 practitioners and researchers gathered on a small farm in the countryside of Denmark to explore co-creation as the main approach to being with one another and with other beings, to make space to allow relationships and activities to emerge in the moment. So out of these two experiences, two of the organizers, Svenja and Anya and Asia, and I wrote a paper on the insect approach, switching the two camps so that the sensing and embodiment camp came before the designing and prototyping camp. And we have submitted it to the World Congress of Architects happening in Copenhagen under the heading of Sustainable Futures Leave No One Behind, which is happening next summer. And we identified like 3 stages to the insect approach: being with, designing with, and living with, as the 3 stages of this design approach. For collaboration and co-creation. The goal, I'm going to read a little bit now from the paper again. The goal is to engage in discussions that reach beyond the state of biodesign today and to explore philosophical theory around post-anthropocentric approaches. Our motivation is based on a deep concern for our Earth and a desire to engage with the full complexity of its biological systems. By putting multi-species philosophy at the center of the approach, The, it encourages designers to integrate a larger array of methods and sites into their practices. It radiates out from a central focus of experiential learning and multi-species philosophy through the human mind and body. The home, the field, and the design studio are environments in which multi-species philosophy is carried out. So the next slide shows this sort of radiating idea, and the center being the body and mind doing multi-species philosophy. The next one being home, being with, critical being and thinking. The next one being designing with, for, together, with insects as the stakeholders. Insects meaning kind of small animals, basically. I'll talk more about that later. And then the field becoming living with and becoming with. So as we work through the rings of the insect approach, we move inwards and outwards from the core, letting the work of the body and mind affect the work in home, studio, and field. By reframing design questions as questions of how to design with, for, and together with multi-species, we create an embodied practice that keeps the post-anthropocentric perspective central to our cause. Each time we cycle through a prototype iteration, we deepen our physical awareness of our connection to other biological cycles and think more clearly about engaging with them through design. So the next section is tools, opportunities, and questions. So I wanted to return to this question of nature. Because one of the tools that I think is really important as artists, designers, and technologists is vocabulary. We have a stake in inventing or reframing critical language as we use to describe our contexts. And hold on just a second. Some of the terms that we started talking about to replace the term of just nature is the living, the grown, the sentient, or beings. And then some terms that have become kind of popular, the non-human or the more than human. Although those terms are problematic too, because they still place the beings in relationship to whether or not they're human or not. So some of the practitioners in the group are not fond of these terms. But I just use it as an example of the kinds of the vocabulary or language questions that we can have philosophical discussions about. Some of the other philosophical discussions we can have talks about are, wilderness or the wild, and it goes from there. Another tool that we have is deep listening, and I've had a lot of or read a lot about different philosophies on how to use deep listening in practice. But I need to give credit to Pauline Oliveros, who was a experimental musician, a composer, an electronic artist, a digital artist, who was really the first that I know of to describe this idea of deep listening. And she did a good job of talking about focal attention versus global attention. So focal attention is like a lens which produces clear detail, but is limited to the subject of attention. So really focusing your attention on a detail, whereas global attention is diffuse and continually expanded to take in the whole. And she talks about needing to balance those two types of attention. One of the new tools that I found recently that I think is really useful is this Methods for Noticing workbook that was put together for 2019 Designing Interactive Systems Conference by these five women in it. They have exercises on both the global and focal deep listening, but they also put out exercises that are on spatial or temporal noticing, on sense-based or embodied noticing, on techno noticing, so noticing with technology, and on noticing. So on sort of evaluating how to notice. And they did it, they did this workshop, this workbook for researchers to better understand the divergent, layered, and conjoined projects that make up worlds by amplifying, augmenting, and attuning their attention to a wide range of actors' perspectives and relations. So as a tool to notice these multi-species worldings, this complexity that we're trying to understand or just starting to learn to understand. And my addition to it is I think it's important as practitioners, as researchers, as artists and designers to be good at deep listening, to practice it, to be good at leading it for other people, to be good at teaching it to other people so that it spreads and that other people can use it. And also to acknowledge that this kind of deep listening is embedded in many indigenous and ancestral traditions already, and that they, that this may be something that has been around for a lot longer. It's not like a new thing that we're just inventing now. Then recently, I also learned about the concept of umwelt. This is the second tool that I think we have as artists, designers, and technologists to try and understand multi-species worldings. This was in the New York Times this summer, and it talks about how every animal lives in its own unique perceptual world, a smorgasbord of sights, smells, sounds, and textures that it can sense, but other species might not. These stimuli defined what this philosopher von Eckel called the umwelt, an animal's bespoke sliver of reality. And he gave some examples in the article that sharks and platypuses sense electrical fields, that rattlesnakes and vampire bats track infrared radiation, that most sighted animals can see ultraviolet light, see or sense ultraviolet light. I'm missing a word there. And that ticks' ability to sense are limited to the touch of hair, the odor that emanates from skin, and the heat of warm blood. But there's been a lot of critique about the idea of umwelt because there's been a lot of kind of superficial attempts to understand what it is. So the question, I think, is how do you put yourself in another species sensory world? So there was a book called Being a Beast by Charles Foster, and he wrote, when we walk in a wood, we share its sensory outputs with all the other creatures there. It lives in its own world and in the brain, and we are surrounded by millions of different worlds, which I liked as an explanation. For the book, he tried living as a badger, otter, fox, deer, and swift, and then he wrote a different chapter about each one of these things. But in the end, he wondered if he was describing anything other than what was in his own head. And he went pretty far. He ate worms. He tried to catch fish with his teeth. I haven't read the Swift one yet, so I don't know if he tried to fly, but he went pretty far, and yet it still might have been rather superficial because our bodies are our bodies, and we don't have the nerves or the limbs that animals have. David Tracy taught a class on umwelt, on animal perception, and this is one of the students' attempt to see like a spider. So I think that art, design, and technology has a lot to offer in this area. And I'm looking forward to finding more examples and also to doing this with my students to try and get into the mind of another animal. This is an exercise that was done at the second camp, and Anton is trying to go into more detail about inventing different animal probes to try and understand what it's like to probe their environment instead of look at it. Then the third tool I wanted to talk about today was staying with the trouble, which is a concept that was talked about by Donna Haraway in her 2016 book. Staying with the trouble is a really interesting concept. She says in her introduction, staying with the trouble requires making odd kin, that is, required each other in unexpected collaborations and combinations in hot compost piles. We become with each other or not at all. That kind of material semiotics is always situated someplace or not no place, entangled and worldly. Alone in our separate kinds of expertise and experience, we know too much and not too little, and we succumb to despair or to hope, and neither is a sensible attitude. She was responding to people who thought climate change would be either solved by technology or that it was too late and nothing good could happen at all. So I think staying with the trouble can be looked at from a micro perspective or a macro perspective. But it means, to me, how can we expand our capacities and tolerance for discomfort? Do we have to solve our discomfort right away? Trouble is situated in the body. There is no escaping it, and there is no quick fix. We need to slow the urge to rush to a solution. We need to look beyond the immediate relationship to a bigger ecosystem. So when we have distaste for an organism, like a rat or a spider, why are we pulled to eliminate it? Is the danger real or perceived? And my sort of, I wanted to do more research about this, but I ran out of time. My like apex example for this is, can humans have a better relationship with mosquitoes? Is it possible to change our relationship to mosquitoes? Or is there no choice at all but to eliminate them? And I personally have a terrible relationship with mosquitoes. You can ask my family, not good. So I asked, what could this mean on a planetary scale? And when this slide, I wanted to make a whole presentation about, and I just ran out of time. For multi-species worldings, for complex systems, for this kind of complex multi-species worldings design, we have to remember that we can run against toxicity, cross-species infections. We can have some very terrible results with invasive species, which we have lots and lots of examples of, bringing in frogs to take out something, and then the frogs take over, or bringing in something to take out something else, and then the something else causes all kinds of problems. I think there's also a question, if we decenter humans from our design, does that decenter environmental justice, which is still such a huge, huge issue, especially here in the United States? Well, forget I even said that. It's just such a huge, huge issue globally. And other unexpected, unwanted results. So how do we do our research and our prototyping responsibly and don't screw something up and make a huge mess? So coming back to this complexity, I'm going to read just the conclusion of the paper that we wrote. To integrate multi-species perspectives into biodesign, we, the insect community members and co-creators, are seeking to transform our design practices in several ways. We are broadening our perceptions so that we become more sensitive to and aware of the presence of small, unnoticed organisms, To be able to recognize and identify their environments, behaviors, life cycles, and interactions, we are integrating more factual and tacit knowledge about other living beings into our practices. Additionally, remind ourselves that we coexist with creatures in our public spaces, homes, and bodies. This way, we have the chance of creating scenarios where more organisms have space to follow their course and organize themselves more organically. What would it mean to rewild architecture? So some final thoughts about complexity and interdisciplinarity. I think we need to, or some of the other tools that we have are just living with lifelong learning, learning with and from one another, thinking of our artifacts as a process and representation of an idea, not as a result or a product. I didn't mean project, I meant product. Staying with the autoethnographic perspective and realizing that our perspective comes from the things in our history and our context, our space that we live in, and staying with the questions and recognizing that our answers are temporary and localized. Using embodiment practices to balance research, train ourselves and others to be aware of the modes of thinking, learning, and knowing, and learn how to switch modes easily when one or the other is most effective. So switching between intuitive and ancestral knowledges and methodical, empirical, and analytical knowledges, which are both reinforced by observation. And I'm going to skip this slide. This slide is like, I just wanted to demonstrate how things are coming out every day. This was a New York Times article from October 27th about how insects like honeybees and locusts gather in swarms and create electrical fields in the atmosphere as strong as those created by thunderstorms. So it just blew my mind. I shared it with my group. It blew their minds. And it's just, there's so much potential and there's so much information coming out every day that we want to integrate into our work. And then finally, just one final plug. I have a winter 23 course called Art and Ecology. It's going to tackle some of these questions. So if anyone is interested, please contact me at my email address. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Amazing synthesis and quest and humility. Very much intersects with a lot of what I'm trying to do, and Lily Mendoza, my wife, is trying to do, and in opening up our focus on being supposedly the supreme species on the planet to recognizing, no, we're not. We're part of these immense webs. Our own bodies are an ecosystem in which we're a minority. That bacteria have been the ancient ones most successful on the planet in terms of duration and extent, and so it's really gratifying to hear what you're doing, especially with insects. And one little quick question. When you talked about the UK venture and the mycelium growing, they grow on the fired clay artifacts?
Yes, so I know some of this technology and not all of it, but the clay was autoclaved, first of all, to make it sterile. And then the clay was also mixed with some cellulose to serve as the food for the mycelium.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and another just quick response, you talked about mosquitoes as a focal point for you trying to change your relationship. Are you aware of Gloria Ornstein's work?
No.
She's out at the University of California, I think, or was there. I use an article of hers called Toward an Ecofeminist Ethic of Shamanism and the Sacred. Okay. She went and apprenticed herself to a Sami shamaness up above the Arctic Circle in Norway. And and has maintained that relationship, and talks about the import of the mosquitoes to the Sami as their protectors against colonization, because most Europeans couldn't stand to be there in the summertime with these hordes of mosquitoes. And so they now have
Right.
a ritual relationship with the mosquitoes. And Ornstein is talking about even having to come to grips with a bunch of dead mosquitoes back in her abode in California, and what that meant vis-a-vis her ongoing relationship with the Sami people and this shamaness there. I can send that to you if you want.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
PDF.
Thank you.
But
So
yes, you're integrating Haraway and Tentacular Being, and her moving from focus on machines to on these organic webs. And I just really, really appreciated all that you brought to the table. So let me stop
we,
and open it up.
we have a question. Can we take down the slide? Or, okay.
Yes.
And then you,
Okay.
Siobhan?
And Jane, if you can enable the chat, because some folks may want to.
The chat is open.
Okay, chat is open. And so I want to just open it up to other people to interact.
Yeah, if I may weigh in here. Yeah, thank you, Colleen. It's a great presentation. Thank you for sharing your research. I think, yeah, I want to hear a little bit more about what your take on the so-called history and the relationship between history, ecology, and environment. So I think you touch upon the so-called ancestral tradition a little bit and use that to suggest this temporal dimension goes a little bit back, and then use that to help us to understand what is going on right now, and then therefore how we can envision a more balanced future, right? So therefore, I think, to me, temporal dimension is very important. Therefore, I want to hear what do you think about how we can learn from the past, be that ancestral tradition or through different historical ecology. Yeah, and then just wondering your thoughts on this aspect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yushwan, for that question. I am definitely very much still figuring out how we bring people with ancestral knowledge into sort of academic ventures, either be it research or workshops or prototyping. I do know some artists who have been very successful at that, and it takes time, I think, in getting hyper local to find those connections. For myself, I've been trying to choose advocacy or activism that's like in different slices, like local, regional, national, and international. So for me, I found a group called the Eastside Climate Action Coalition. And so they're a group that is working in my neighborhood and contains like long-term residents of my neighborhood, and so have deep knowledge of my neighborhood and the history of environmental injustice where I live. And so again, listening becomes so crucial as a tool. Just remembering that it doesn't, and I talked to the leader about this just the other week. It's so important to remember that you don't have to be an academic to have really valuable information about the site, you know? So I think about it as being kind of site specific. And then the other thing that has been very useful to me is the book Braiding Sweetgrass. Do you know this book? Yeah, it's been very popular, but it could be even more popular. This Robin Kimmerer is kind of just a really great link because she's both an academic and a Native person. So she does a really amazing job of connecting the two and talking about some story. She's very specific. She takes some Native knowledge, but then sort of reinforces it with her biological knowledge. So she sort of kind of brings examples of where the two meet. And the example that always sticks up in my mind first is the three sisters story of corn, bean, and squash, and how if you do those three together, they help reinforce each other through many different ways and help each other grow through immunization, but also through structure and through sharing nutrients as well. So it really showed me how the indigenous stories maybe didn't have the like test tube knowledge of like how things work, but they figured it out, you know, over time, how to be sustainable.
Okay. Other questions we have in the chat?
Laura has a question, and then we can do the chat. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing this amazing work and your thoughts. I'm going to have to contact you privately about maybe making a presentation at Upland Hills School. I don't know if you know of Upland Hills School, but your work is very relevant and connected to that.
Great.
But I'd like to ask you, I'm interested also in environmental injustice, and I've been teaching my International Politics of Human Rights course with David Pello. And David Pello offers some really interesting thoughts about the agency of non-human animals and also features of the land as having agency. And I think, and also as presenting resistance to planetary destruction. But I'd like to, and I think some of your remarks touched on that idea of non-human agency, especially in the beginning when you talked about authorship. So I'm just curious if you'd like to add more about your sense of non-human agency and how it relates to your work and what you've discovered about that.
Sure. I'm trying to figure out how not to go on and on about that. But so I guess I'll start with about 20 years ago, one of my graduate professors gave me this prompt that she was going to use in a class of like inviting me to become closer to some non-human creature in my home. And the first thing that came to my mind was my cat, because I had just gotten a new cat. And my cat was feral. It was rescued from my yard, and she was really feral, like but I needed a project, so both my husband and I needed a project, and so we kind of lived with her and kept her in the bathroom for it was like 2 weeks before we could even touch her, and so she's 15 now, and it's just been an incredible experience getting closer to her and learning how to listen to her rather than impose my ideas of cathood onto her. And so one of the first things I learned was that she really, oriented her world through smell. Like she would do the weirdest things. And I was like, why are you doing this? And then I would realize that it was through smell. And so she, I'm sorry, you guys, but she is the greatest cat in the world. So But she really taught me how to do better observation. And, you know, kind of like Jane Goodall, I sort of just have this fantasy of being one of those people who just like goes out into the woods and like observes. You know, I don't know why I didn't do that, but I didn't. So it's I feel like it's too late now, but I do that as a layperson. And I've just gotten a lot better at just watching um, and recording and listening and trying not to bring my assumptions about animalhood to it. And it's helped me a lot to get closer to animals. And you know, especially with the internet and all the amazing animal videos that you can see online, it's just really obvious to me that they have agency. I mean, I just don't see. I think about why people deny it, but I don't understand it. You know, so I guess that's all I'll say on that for now. But yeah.
Okay.
And please do contact me too. Please do. Yeah.
There are a couple things in the chat.
Okay.
Peggy wants to know the name of the book by Gloria Orenstein.
Yeah, it's not a book, it's an article.
You can probably send it to Case later on.
Yeah, I can send it and we'll send it out.
Okay, and then there's a question from Sally. How is mycelia used in architecture now?
Oh, well, that is an interesting question. Thank you, Sally. The use of mycelia is just exploding. Yeah, and so people are, the scale of what you can do is growing very, very quickly. So people are using it in tiles and bricks and those kinds of sort of modular things so that you can stack them or, you know, arrange them. But people are also starting to use it in furniture, packing supplies, insulation. I'm trying to think of what other research is. Well, the biggest project is this project called Fungar, Fungar, and that is some sort of acronym. I'm not really sure. And it's a multi-university European collaborative, and they want to build a building that's like completely made out of mycelium, including like the HVAC and the electrical, and like they're doing all kinds of research on like how mycelium could contribute to electrical systems. So that's the biggest scale thing that I know of. Fungar. So yeah, it's happening very quickly. There's like if you're an Instagram user, there's lots you can do if you just have a hashtag of mycelium or a hashtag of biomaterials or a hashtag of mushroom, you'll start to get all of these posts of Instagram seems to be the place where you can find the most updated information.
So Colleen, can I follow that up?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Good. With just two comments that are sort of a little bit related. One is IKEA, I know in packaging has changed for a few years, has been using only mycelia for packaging. For all its packaging.
So are they already there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew that they were going towards it, but I didn't know if they had made it there yet.
The other comment is completely unrelated, and it's a comment, I don't know if you heard this NPR thing on Thomas Edison's Steinway piano that was just sold. And so this is totally off track, but sort of connected. And what I'm connecting it to is your idea of the sensory senses that animals have.
Mm-hmm.
The Steinway was found to have bite marks inside it, many, because Edison could not hear very well and he wanted to feel the music. And I, you know, on some part of me thinks of this somehow as connected to some of what you're talking about, the sense-based noticing or listening. Anyway, that's an aside, but I thought it was
Yeah.
fascinating.
I think there are several animals that feel hearing through their jaws. So
Skunks. I think there's something with skunks either, I think. But anyway. And
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this talk. It was fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah.
Even though I understood only maybe half, but.
We have some hands up. Andrea Knudsen.
Yeah, this talk was wonderful. Thank you so much.
thank you.
And I learned a lot as well. I'm trying to lower my hand. Yeah, one of the reasons that I mean, maybe you can kind of think along with me on this too. I've given up using the terms non-human or more than human, is that they are so steeped in white privilege. You know, they basically announce one category of human, which is, you know, historically really problematic because it erases Black and Indigenous histories. So the category itself is sort of deeply corrupted from that. And so if you consider, you know, you know, for example, an Indigenous perspective, then that relationship is, you know, it sort of erases histories of relationality and reciprocity that existed for millennia. So that's one issue. And my own work in Indigenous communities has really helped kind of alter, you know, use different terminology. And I want to kind of propose possibly sovereignties, you know, like the idea of a buffalo nation, right? Or of a plant nation.
Yes.
Or of mosquito nation.
That's interesting.
It sort of demands that you be a little bit more specific about the life that you're referring to. Right. And also it grants a kind of, it grants a life beyond humanity, right? There's a sovereignty to it. So that also though applies, and this is my question, I guess, it also applies for me because my own research is in, I'm sort of calling it the sovereignty of clay. I'm sort of tracking in colonial archives and actually presently in Michigan landscapes. So to what extent, you know, if we kind of are able to dig ourselves out of the problematics of non-human and more than human terminology and think more in terms of sovereignties, then I'm wondering how much your work actually does, like, I hear you talking about clay, you know, and Laura mentioned something like this too, like things that we would consider more material elements of life, right? And to what extent your own work thinks about the sovereignties of, for example, clay or rock or wind or thunderstorm or, you know, that perspective.
Yeah, great comments. And I love that idea of nations. That reminds me of, I have to find this New Yorker cover, or no, I don't think it was a cover, it was inside, but it had like all these things at like a UN panel, but it was like gems and it was all these different materials. Did you see that by any chance? It's really cool. I'll send it to you. I'll find it and I'll send it to you. But it was definitely that idea of different sovereignties. And you might be interested in some of the clay work that the group did. I kind of didn't go into it because it just felt like too much, but some of the members were experts in harvesting local clays and cleaning them and using them. And that was something I had never thought about before. So I thought that was really interesting. But yes, I think of my materials, I think about materiality a lot. And I think about, I mean, the direction I've gone is I think more about working with living materials and giving them a life and an agency. When I'm working with things like wood and plaster and plastic. I have to say, I don't think of them as much as being sovereign, but I do think about them as having their own, like trying to work with what they want to do rather than trying to force them to do something they don't want to do. But that's kind of more of a formal strategy of like trying to bring out the best qualities of the material rather than trying to like make it do something. But I work with a lot of materials that are very like ephemeral. I work with water, I work with light, I work with wind. So I do work with a lot of phenomenological materials in my work in the past. And I love that. I love working with materials that are invisible or that are natural or difficult. I mean, people thought I was crazy to work with water and electricity, but I did, and I loved it. So that's a few quick answers to your questions, but there's definitely a lot more that we could discuss, and I would love to do that sometime.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Karen McGarry has her hand up as well. Been waiting patiently.
Hi. That's okay. Thanks. Thanks for hosting this. Sorry, I had to call in from my phone. I'm in between meetings. So I thank you so much for this, Colleen. This has been just totally enlightening. And I kind of tagging onto what you were just talking about, the idea of sustainability. And I come to this from kind of the educational perspective and thinking about how we kind of produce the idea of art production is often about materials that do more damage than good. And educators often end up having classroom full of things that have been made, but there's nothing you can absolutely do with them to actually help any of our issues. So I just would like to hear you like talk about sustainability and materiality, because it's something that I kind of struggle with as I help people prepare to become teachers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a real problem. And one of the classes I teach is like a beginning, 3D design class. And so, a lot of times people make something and then they just throw it away. So, I definitely am trying to work more with like foraging for materials rather than buying materials. That's one of my big values in that class. And using materials that would, potentially be garbage anyway, like recycled cardboard. I feel a little bit torn about it because it's, it has aesthetic limitations and it's not as fun as working with nicer, higher quality materials. But, I sort of think of it as a level thing. You start that way and then you work your way up to different materials. But I also think making things that are temporary, more and more, I'm like, what is the point of making permanent, this is going to last forever kinds of things? I think it's, and that comes partially from my training as an interactive artist too. Like, it's just much more important to make experiences than it is to make objects. So more and more, I'm content with making experiences, and I also am, more content to make artifacts or that are really just basically documentation of a process. That's like on the Miro board, and it really isn't in the end not anything except for an evolution of a person's thinking with picture and video and sound. Yeah. So really non-traditional kinds of artwork. And I've really kind of like equalized my ideas of what artwork is in a way that I think most professors don't. Like, you know, I've really democratized, you know, so I don't put more value on a precious painting made with oils and a Miro board filled with documentation of a process. That's me, and I know that not everyone can do that, but for me, they're equal in value to me.
Thanks for that. That was well put. Thank you.
Others who would like to jump in?
Just a small comment, Colin. I really appreciate your presentation. There's so much in it, but it's just curious to me that there is so much now, and I am just beginning to dip my toe into it. But this entire field on new materialism, object animacy, vibrant matter, and then I think we don't really need high theory even to know what all our indigenous kin have always known, where they live in a universe that's alive, where nothing is dead matter. So this semester, because I was just getting into vibrant matter, I had an exercise that I did with my students, from object to kin, where they have to take one of their favorite things that they use daily and to sit with it, document their process of just sitting with it and allowing, and maybe even our pronouns will have to shift, right? We call an object it, but what if it were a living being? Because after all, even our commodities are made up of what were originally beings in their natural abodes, that wild beings that have been forcibly taken from the wild without so much as asking for permission. But and then it dovetails also into your question of what is nature, right? Now, I believe from listening to our indigenous peoples, where I come from in the Philippines, they don't have a separate category for nature. They are nature, and nature is them, so that whatever they're doing or whatever is being done to the natural world, they experience it as being done to themselves. So there's no, environment is something that is non-existent, but that they are embedded in nature.
Yeah. I mean, when I started writing, about these things, I would be looking up synonyms for nature and for environment, and you can't really find very many. There isn't a lot in the English language for it, and it's a real problem. I think what Andrea said about you kind of have to try to get more specific instead of just this sort of general kind of category of is important. But let's see, there's something else I was gonna mention that you said. It just automatically separates us from everything else, and it really is something that I think a lot about how to kind of edit it out of my language. Yeah.
I think that's an ongoing struggle for all of us. My understanding of the way the planet organizes itself, at least for the last half billion years, is in terms of biodiversity bounded roughly by water, by the way water pulls together different life forms and what we would call inorganic, but from an indigenous point of view, still living beings like water and wind and soil that Andrea was talking about. And so there is no general nature, no general wild. There only are specific local ecosystems inhabited by indigenous communities, or even back before there were human beings, nonetheless, life forms that are very specific to that bioregion. And how do we adjust our language to that? How do we get so that we don't reproduce colonialism in the very process of trying to counteract it? And I think that's an ongoing struggle. And then see, Andrea had her hand up again real quickly. Yeah, kick in.
I can't hear you, Andrea.
Sorry.
Okay.
I just wanted to follow up on that by saying I think that it's, it's our own limitation that we are not accustomed to seeing agency or sovereignties in soil or in clay or in wind, because it's, we have been talking about like local harvesting of clay, and I have had the privilege of working with clay whose origins I knew, and then was, privileged enough then also to learn how the origin of that clay harvest dictates everything from that moment that it's removed from its ecology. So everything from the kind of temper you would use to the specific kiln or other form of firing, to the way that it would sort of dictate the kind of pot that you would actually make out of it. So I think it really is our own limitations that we don't really know how to trace back that kind of agency to a source when it comes to something like clay. So once you do, though, once you sort of get literate in how those localities really determine how we have to adapt to them, that it just becomes much more interesting.
Yeah, I would like to add something to that too, and that is I've been trying to figure out how to do work on this for a while, and I can't quite figure it out, but trying to unravel people's ideas about boundaries as well. We have these such fixed ideas about boundaries, and we're so visually used to seeing the shape of our states in maps, or the shapes of our countries in maps, or the shape of our continents in maps. And I think especially the continent one, Jim, when you were talking about the, biodiversity and the oceans, we know that the shores of our continents are so porous, and that, the beaches or whatever, the coastlines shift all the time, and that borderland is so important to biodiversity and to life, and it's one of my favorite places, or sets of places, to think about it. And so I would really like to do work that kind of tries to reframe that for people, to understand that beaches are not fixed, or any kind of coastline is not a fixed place, and you would think that people would start to get that with everything that's going on, but somehow it's just escaping people's perception. Yeah, Andrea.
Yeah.
You're muted.
I put it in the chat. You have to read The Black Shoals.
Okay.
It's by Tiffany Latabo King, and it's about it. Makes a methodological intervention into humanistic histories that situate the shoals as a sort of shifting, as a focus to help us think about the way that we have to shift and be open to new fluid sort of combining sort of ideas of what our basic definitions behind liberal humanism. So it's very powerful.
Can't wait.
And I was thinking in mentioning water, particularly not so much continents and oceans. Certainly that's one place it shows up, but local watersheds. And there again, streams and rivers are constantly shifting, slithering across the landscape in their organization of any given local ecozone. And then I'm trying to learn from some of my own Indo-European indigenous ancestry, where, for instance, in the Parzival tale, linden trees were understood as boundary markers, linden giving a particular cordage that is used to pull things together in indigenous cultures coming off the Asian steppe as well as in the outback of Europe. And then that tree marks a place where you're moving out of one ensemble of life, and you don't have the right just to step over the boundary or to cross the water ford. You have to ask permission, learn the other beings, other names of the zone you're headed into. And the linden tree itself marks a kind of what we now call scientifically an ecotone, a place where there's overlapping species and a lot of mutation and novelty going on in the interaction between different organisms. And so rethinking difference from that point of view is part of what I'm fascinated with.
That's interesting. Do you have a citation for that? What are you reading about? Where are you reading about that?
Well, we're learning that from Martin Prechtel, who is a native guy that Lily and I have been spending time with for more than a decade.
Wonderful.
Who's an amazing synthesizer. He was himself, his native background is Anishinaabe and Cree, but he grew up among the Pueblo folk in New Mexico and then was adopted by the Sutuhio Mayan for more than 10 years. Sort of completely rearranged by that experience.
Hi, Andrea.
He's written a number of books. Google his name. So we have like 2 minutes left. Is that, oh, wow. That's one according to my computer. Any last burning question, or babe, you want to kick in with something? Nope. Colleen, you want to give us a
Well, I really appreciate the discussion and the support. It was great to speak with you today. And I am looking to expand my conversation. So if anyone wants to contact me outside of this forum, please do. So.
Thank you so much, Colleen. This has been such a gift to us.
Oh, thank you.
So much learning. And for those of us who just joined us for the first time, we hope that you can get on our website. We'll send it to you. I marked some of the folks that are here for the first time. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Rest of the day.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Jane, you can stop the recording.
Hi, Aunt Ruth.
Colin, maybe you can stop the recording. Yes, you are.
What am I doing? Okay.
Yeah, just stop the recording. Yeah.
I'm not recording. I don't know who's recording. It might be Jane.
Yeah, it's Jane.
Mm-hmm.
This has been amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It was my pleasure.
We're really so much on the same page on this.
I feel like so too. So it's great. Yeah. Oh, there's my mom. Hi, Mom.
Yeah. Is it Ruth?
Ruth is my aunt.
Oh, wow. Wow. Welcome. Fabulous, fabulous niece you have on here and daughter. Yeah.
I hope you guys could hear okay.
Yeah. Okay, so.
Okay, I'm gonna go.
Yep.
Talk to you later, Lily.
Yeah, okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.